Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into Isaiah chapter 22. We're talking about the dramatic ancient siege of Jerusalem and honestly, the profound historical and spiritual fallout that came with it. It's this wild moment in history where absolute military terror collides with a massive crisis of faith. We're going to see exactly how ancient people reacted when their backs were completely, literally against the wall. So, here's our roadmap for today. First, the Valley of Vision, then the approaching Assyrian army, followed by the desperate defenses of Jerusalem. After that, we'll hit spiritual apathy, the fall of Shebna, and finally wrap up with the key of David.
All right, Section 1, the Valley of Vision. Right in the opening lines of this account, we hit this agonizing irony. The prophet actually calls Jerusalem the Valley of Vision, which makes sense, right? It's geographically lower than the surrounding hills. But historically, it's the absolute high point of divine revelation. But right now, the citizens are up on their flat housetops, just celebrating. They're completely oblivious to the horrific Assyrian blockade that is literally marching right to their doorsteps to starve them out. They think they're safe, but they are terribly, terribly deceived.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the horrific reality of ancient blockades. The text declares, "Thy slain men are not slain with the sword." See, this wasn't going to be some quick, glorious battle. To put it in perspective, the historical records of the Assyrian king Sennacherib actually boast that he trapped King Hezekiah like a caged bird inside Jerusalem. He shut the great gates. So the people here, they're dying of agonizing privation and starvation over a long period of time, not by the quick strike of a sword.
Well, the terror of this reality completely shatters their false confidence. We find out that the leaders of Judah just fled, but they didn't get far. They were actually captured without a single bow even being drawn by the archers. Total capitulation. And seeing this absolute ruin, the prophet Isaiah just weeps bitterly over the spoiling of his people. He recognizes that this day of trouble and treading down was permitted by the Lord of hosts himself.
Moving on to Section 2, the approaching Assyrian army.
So the historical texts reveal that the Assyrians actually brought in these specialized forces from conquered lands. The text says, "Elam bare the quiver, and Kir uncovered the shield." Elam was famous for its deadly archers, and Kir provided these incredibly fierce men ready for battle. And uncovering the shield? That meant taking it out of its leather casing. They weren't messing around. They were fully prepared for a brutal, immediate assault on the city.
Just picture this terrifying image for a second. The choicest valleys surrounding Jerusalem, places like Gibeon and Hinnom, were suddenly just choked with elite Assyrian chariots and cavalry. They poured into these natural choke points, bringing the sheer terror of war directly to the great gates of the city. The siege had officially begun.
Okay, Section 3, desperate defenses of Jerusalem.
So, faced with total annihilation, with an army camped literally right at their gates, how did Jerusalem respond? Well, they didn't immediately surrender. Instead, they sprang into this massive frenzy of desperate military and civilian preparation. They suddenly woke up to the gravity of their situation. It's actually an amazing display of ancient defense engineering. King Hezekiah executed some truly brilliant survival tactics here. First, they checked their weapons in the armory. Next, they inspected the broken walls. Then, and this is absolutely crucial, they stopped the water outflows. They gathered the waters of the lower pools so the Assyrians outside would have absolutely nothing to drink during the siege. They even went so far as to tear down their own civilian houses to use the stones to thicken and fortify the city walls. I mean, talk about desperate measures.
But here's where a really devastating critique comes in. We find the core tragedy of this whole historical moment. You see, despite building these impressive reservoirs between the walls and executing pretty flawless tactical defenses, the people relied completely on their own prudent measures. They entirely ignored God. They fortified the physical walls of the city, but they completely neglected the true maker and protector of that city.
This brings us to Section 4, a fatal spiritual apathy. There is such a heartbreaking contrast here. In the face of impending doom, God actually called for humble repentance, weeping, mourning, wearing sackcloth. But how did the people respond? With a fatalistic partying spree. They chose joy, feasting, eating meat and drinking wine. Their motto literally became the infamous phrase, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we shall die." And this leads to a chilling decree from God. He declares that this utter refusal to seek him in their darkest hour was an unforgivable apathy, because they chose self-indulgence over repentance right when the enemy was at the gates. Their tragic fate was sealed. The physical walls might hold for a minute, but their spiritual foundation, it had entirely collapsed.
All right, Section 5, the fall of Shebna.
Now, the narrative focus dramatically shifts. God commands Isaiah to go directly confront a man named Shebna. Now, Shebna was the steward, essentially the highest official right under the king. But instead of managing this massive crisis, this presumptuous official was obsessed with carving his own glorious, permanent legacy into solid rock. He was up there building himself an extravagant, high-altitude tomb among the royal dead, while his nation was literally crumbling all around him.
God's response to this arrogance is swift and honestly quite poetic. The Lord strips Shebna of his glorious chariots and all his administrative authority. God prophesies that he will violently toss Shebna like a ball into a large country, which meant exile into the vast plains of Assyria. Because he cared only for his image and reputation, God promises he's going to die far away from that glorious tomb he was carving for himself.
And finally, Section 6, the Key of David.
So next, we see an incredible transition of power. God raises up his servant Eliakim to replace Shebna. God physically dresses Eliakim in Shebna's robe and girdle, transferring the government right into his hands. And unlike the self-serving Shebna, Eliakim is promised to be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. He's going to be a true protector for these desperate people.
Absolute governing authority is placed right on Eliakim's shoulder. This is symbolized by the key of the house of David. As the ultimate gatekeeper, Eliakim holds the power to grant or deny access to the royal treasury, the storehouses, and the very presence of the king. The text says when he opens a door, no one can shut it, and when he shuts it, no one can open it.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is how this ancient politics connects straight to New Testament theology. Revelation chapter 3 actually quotes this exact passage. It reveals that Eliakim was a prophetic type, and that Jesus Christ is the ultimate fulfillment of this role. Jesus holds the true key of David. He's the ultimate steward who grants an open door for the faithful, giving us direct access to the throne of God the Father, something no man can ever shut.
The prophecy ultimately closes with a really sobering reminder. The unfaithful peg, which represents the arrogant Shebna, must be totally removed, cut down, and allowed to fall, so that the true, glorious steward can take his proper place. Everything hanging on that corrupt peg falls right along with it, clearing the way for righteous governance.
So as we conclude this explainer, looking back at the terrified citizens of Jerusalem and that stark contrast in leadership between Shebna and Eliakim, we have to ask ourselves a profound question. When our own defenses crumble and the enemy is at our gates, do we rely solely on our own engineering, or do we seek the ultimate steward who holds the true key to our salvation? Think about that. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.